Good morning, everyone. This is session D2, Project Development 101, from condition assessment to scope development. My name is Jeff Gagno. I'm the Eastern Massachusetts Preservation Circuit Rider for Preservation Massachusetts, and I will be helping to facilitate this session. And first of all, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Ben Haavik. Ben is team leader for property at Historic New England, where he is responsible for the preservation and maintenance of Historic New England's 38 historic properties that are open to the public. Yes, I said 38. If you think you have one property that you worry about, Ben has 38 just at work. He oversees 15 full-time staff, which include preservation carpenters, preservation managers, and landscape staff. And during his 17 years at Historic New England, among many other important property management and preservation planning efforts, Ben has introduced a system for strategic prioritization and management of historic New England's properties. With 38 to worry about, you definitely have to have a plan like that in place. So Ben's going to make a presentation that will wrap up by about 11:40 or so that we can have at least 10 minutes at the end for questions until the session ends at 10:50. We can actually go a little bit longer if necessary because we're one of the last sessions of the day. But if you do have a question, please use the Q&A dialog at the bottom menu bar of your screen and just type your questions into there and we'll get to as many as we can. Finally, there are some additional resources that we've provided near the original link to the session that you can check out. Ben's put a couple of things up there, and we've put a bunch of things from the Preservation Mass resource guides about project planning that you can also check out and download from our website. So thank you very much for attending this session, and please take it away, Ben.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you everyone for having me, for attending, for being interested. As Jeff said, this is a project kind of planning 101, and so I'm going to tell you that our learning points for today are going to be kind of an overview of the project planning process, of course, how to build a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and that's the teaser, and then why more information in your project plan is better. As referenced, I work for Historic New England. We have 38 historic sites, which means 166 buildings and over 1,300 acres of landscape from Rhode Island up to mid-coast Maine, from the 17th century to the 20th century. And my team is the property care team. We're responsible for the preservation and maintenance of the buildings and landscapes owned and operated by Historic New England. So we are a nonprofit. We own these 38 sites and kind of open them to the public as house museums, and do a wide range of programming on the sites, from just tours to weddings and functions and craft fairs. There's a whole bunch of craft fairs coming up soon, so if you're interested in that, let me know. My team does everything from brush clearing to garden restoration, from heating systems to preservation structural repairs. So it's the whole kit and caboodle. We do big projects like barn restorations and painting buildings, but also changing the paint scheme. In this case, you see the green trim on the picture on the right. This is Castle Tucker up in Wiscasset, Maine. We did paint analysis and determined that the appropriate paint color was not the red that had been painting the house for many years, but in fact should have been a nice green like the one you're seeing here. And so we're able to do preservation and kind of interpretation projects like that. We also do incredibly small projects, minor splice repair of a rotting piece of wood, or relay the flagstones on top of the wall at the Gropius house. But it's the same process. It's the same thought process for whether it's small or big that we go through, and that's what we're going to walk through. And before I really start that, I'm going to say that kind of the key thing that anyone should have is a real understanding of the history of your site. And that plays a role in how you make your decisions about repairs and your project plans. And so the classic is the historic structures report that you might commission so that you really understand your property. But there are other kind of documents that you can do. But again, it's just really important to understand that background. So here are my 5 steps to the project planning process: condition assessments, goals and objectives, condition assessments, again, scope and treatment plan and specifications phase. So we're going to start and we're going to walk through all of these, and I'm going to start with the first condition assessment. Now, this phase is what I'm really going to call the general site condition assessment, or the macro assessment. You're kind of getting a real feel, a handle on what's going on at your site. You're looking at everything, the buildings, the outbuildings, the landscape, how everything is playing together. What is it that it's all telling you? Now, I do have the advantage of having professional preservation staff, and we're able to do a lot of this ourselves. So this might be a phase that you ask a consultant to come in and say, walk me through this. What do you see? What's wrong? But I would also say that as any building owner or steward, you should walk around your site yourself and say, does this look right or not? Like, because maybe something's wrong and you can tell by yourself. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So one of the first steps is always talking to the users of the site. That may be you thinking about, I always find water in the building after heavy rain. Maybe there's something wrong. Or, the water's puddling near the building. Every time I plug that vacuum cleaner in, it pops a circuit. Maybe there's something wrong here. Or, gosh, this never really worked right. The door always sticks. It's always a pain. So it's either your experiences, or it's talking to people daily. For us, it's talking to the people, running the tours on a regular basis. Like, what's going on? What's going on at your site? Looking is very important. So standing around, historic New England has been around for 110 years. It appears that we have 110 years of experience of standing for photos and pointing at things. But that's an important part. And if you notice, all of these actually, it's more than one person. There's always a grouping, because honestly, the more you work with the building, the more, if it's your building, you might start to turn a blind eye to what's going on, kind of like, oh yeah, it's been that way forever, which is the value of doing it with a friend or a partner or a colleague, or again, the outside consultant, to say, oh yeah, that's been happening forever. And they're like, oh, really? Or did you ever notice this? And you're like, oh gosh, I've been looking past that for a long time. So the 2 eyes on the perspective, always a great thing when you're looking at a building. And again, why do I say this could be done by the building owner as opposed to just hiring out a consultant? Because we're looking big picture. What's wrong, or what seems to be wrong at this point? And so if we walk through these photos, if I look at the top of this chimney, I don't have to be an expert mason to say, boy, the top of that chimney looks crumbly and probably isn't right. I wonder if there's an issue there. If I look at this roof, well, it's kind of obvious. It's not a green roof, shouldn't have that much moss on it. Gosh, we should be paying attention to this. And again, the water around the foundation, the gutters work and the downspouts work, but maybe I shouldn't dump all the water out right out at my foundation. Likewise, paint peeling, we're probably all experts at seeing that. Water stains on the inside probably means water's coming in from somewhere. Maybe it's a toilet, maybe it's the outside. And then, of course, just material failures. That plaster is supposed to stay up on the ceiling. Maybe it shouldn't fall. Maybe there's an issue here. So all of that's obviously, simplifying, an issue. But that's all it takes, is looking, seeing that something's wrong and saying, we've got some issues here. Let's think about that. Now, what happens? You can get many issues, and it gets depressing. It gets hopeless. Maybe you want to, be like an ostrich, put your head in the dirt, hide from your issues. But really, you should address it. And sorry, this is one of my coworkers just checking out a dry well system. But you could get overwhelmed very easily. And so what we always think about then is the prioritization. So I have all of this data. How do I make sense of it? And this is where you might need the expert help. If you're not an expert yourself or have a good sense yourself, you might need that experts to help guide you. But ultimately, when we look at this, we're looking at safety hazards. That big limb, dangling in the tree, probably should get dealt with and probably should get dealt with soon. You know, some of these are obvious, but maybe some of them are less obvious. Water penetration, hey, water's supposed to stay on the outside of my building. It's not supposed to get in. I've got an issue here. We probably need to deal with that sooner than later. I always talk about damage to historic fabric. Sometimes we're like, ooh, that paint job, it's failing, but the wood is still good because I'm juggling 160 buildings, 160 paint jobs. So sometimes I'm like, how bad is that paint and how bad is it as the wood underneath treating? Do I like doing that? No, but at some point you have to kind of like balance things and say what's worse than the other. And then I always put aesthetics last on the list. Aesthetics are important. I'm not going to paint this. And then everyone freaks out because they're like, well, this is the front facade. It's right on Main Street. Everyone sees it. You know, everyone's sitting in traffic on Route 1 in Wiscasset, Maine, and they see this house. We need to paint the front facade. Okay. All right. That's also an important priority, you know, to be able to kind of present your best foot forward. So we've done the assessment. We've done a little bit of prioritization. Now it's really time to set your goals and objectives. And what I mean by that is like, okay, I need to fix my roof. I need the siding to be painted. You've kind of narrowed down your options. You're working with this kind of, we call it the top 5, because again, to make sense of it, we go every site and we say, what's the top 5 issues at the site? And we kind of balance it. It's the roof. The roof needs to be fixed or replaced. I would say this isn't quite good enough. Why is it we need to replace it? Oh, because water is getting in. Or why do we need to paint it before the wood begins to deteriorate? Or likewise, like I said, everyone sees this on Route 1 in traffic in the summer in Wiscasset, Maine. We need to paint this now. So that's a totally reasonable reason. We need to define that. Why are we doing the work that we're doing? And why are we defining it? Because that helps us set the next stage. Am I doing this for the budget? Do I have to defend this budget to my board of directors or an outside funder? You know, is it a grant? Is it a fundraising campaign? Is it a capital campaign? Do we have to defend this to everyone in town and say, this is why we need to do it? Or are you just doing it for your long-term planning? Are you saying, hey, I've got all these issues. How am I going to approach this? This is the order, but let's make sure we understand why we're doing it and why we're kind of ordering it in the way that we are. Now, I'll add one more thing is like, you can always add more to your goals and objectives. And frankly, depending on your market, so these are the same too. And all I've added to the end is, and climate change is only going to make this worse. And climate change, because sometimes you need to underscore the point. Like, we need to deal with this, and it's just going to keep getting worse. And frankly, a lot of funders resonate with climate change and that the fact that you're trying to be proactive about dealing with climate change and addressing your issues. It's that easy. We're now at the 3rd step, which is the second conditions assessment. So what is that? We've done the macro. We've said we want to do a project. We've defined the project. Now I say, now it's time to get into the details. We've been pretty broad at this point, a lot of kind of openness about what we are looking at. And I would say this is when we really dig in. And what are the areas of damage or deterioration that we're really talking about? You know, the roof needs to be replaced, but what does that mean? You know, like, what's going on and what is happening? How much is damaged? And what do I need to know about the damaged feature? Now, in most cases, most of you might need that consultant or professional to work with you. I'm speaking as if I'm speaking to an audience of maybe managers of the historic properties or homeowners who might be kind of dealing with this themselves. So that's kind of, when I say that, that's kind of what I'm thinking about. And that's why you might need the consultant or professional. Again, this is something we do in-house for most projects. There are some things that are out of our skill set, but we really want to dig in. And so we're looking at, you know, this image shows the front kind of door for Otis House. And we kind of really spent a lot of time thinking about where is the issues, what's going on here, what is failing, what is not failing, what's just kind of a, you know, superficial, you know, paint job versus actually the wood is rotted. So to that point, you know, some of these images on the left show all, you know, your pointy object that you stick in to verify that the wood is rotted. I just stick my keys in, pull out your keys, poke the wood, goes in. It's not good. It's not healthy wood. But this is when we're digging in and trying to figure out what needs to be replaced. And now is the time for the details. Now it's the nitty gritty. If you think you have sill repair, like on the right, you want to open it up. You want to really kind of look at it and understand what it is you're talking about. Because the next step is like, you need to know a lot about this repair before you move forward. And this list could be materials, what kind of wood is it? Is it wood? Is it not wood? What are the dimensions of that? What are the fasteners? So is it nails? Is it this? Is it that? What kind of finishes are on there? Is it paint or is it whitewash or is it something else? What is happening to this? And think about, this historical perspective of, so what is the character defining features that we're talking about on this? And is there criticality in this repair? And all of this is important because this data provides that basis for in-kind replacement and preservation compliance. So when I say in-kind replacement, of course, as preservationists, we like to kind of, replace wood with the same type of wood, the same dimensions. If you have to make a repair, it's called in-kind in that way. And the compliance is really, are you in a historic district? Do you have a restriction from the state? Do you have a restriction from another entity? Like, you have to kind of be able to describe your work and rationalize it. And in-kind replacement is a major component of that. So you also want to know how much is damaged. It's usually a kind of a quantity, a unit of measurement, and sometimes it's a little hazy. But cladding, maybe it's like, oh, it's 5 clapboards have slipped, or it's a total of 25 linear feet of cladding, or 60% of the cladding has deteriorated. The sill might be 6 linear feet of deterioration. Mortar is maybe it's 10 square feet of wall needs to be pointed. And you're defining that because that's what the contractor ultimately is going to be kind of bidding on. How much work is this going to involve? So, with the cladding, it's like, what do you need to know? Well, what was the material? Eastern white pine. How long were they? Well, they were random lengths between 4 and 6 feet. They had a 5-inch exposure and they had a stained finish, but we kind of need to know a little bit more about that. But for now, just know that it's going to be stained. With the sill, we know it's white oak, it's 7 by 7. There's about 6 feet of deterioration, but we should assume there's going to be a 2-foot lap joint on either side. So we need a 10-foot piece of wood. Mortar loss, it's all the kind of same questions. Again, this is highly technical details. The regular homeowner is not going to be able to provide these details, but it's good to understand what goes into a good project plan, because this is what you need to give to that contractor ultimately and say, you're going to need a 10-foot piece of wood. You should verify that while you're on site, but we think it's about 10 feet. So when you give me the price for this project, that's kind of the parameter that we're working under, and we're all talking the same language. Now, how do you know what information to gather? Or more importantly, if you're trusting your consultant or your architect or someone else to develop the right material, I would say you need to be doing your own research at the same time. What do you need to know to be able to talk to the architect, your consultant, before you go to the contractor? Do you really understand what the project is? And there's a lot of different ways. For us, we are constantly reviewing past projects. We do produce white papers and guidelines. They're posted on our website. But of course, the standard is the National Park Service publications, like the one on the left here, repointing mortar joints in historic masonry buildings. Those are standards in the field. But the internet, you can find a lot of stuff on the internet, and you have to take it with a grain of salt. But ultimately, a lot of French drains, like in the center, are built the same way. If you're like, I don't really understand the concepts of the French drain, look it up. Like, there is a lot out there that's going to tell you what it means, so that then you can talk to your consultant or your contractor about what you don't like about this picture. Is that weird stuff on the surface? Can we hide that? Oh, of course we can hide that. Okay, great. So your peers, contractors, we talk to contractors all the time. We'll invite a contractor in and talk through a project and learn how they're going to think through a project. and then go write our project plan based on that. So it's not a shame to not know the answers, but you should try to work towards finding out the answers so that you understand what the work is going to entail. So also important, what is the underlying cause of the condition? You know, when I first started Historic New England, this is a 2006 image. This is, you know, probably just 2 years into my time there. They said, we need to paint this ceiling. And I was like, well, I could paint that ceiling, but we really need to fix the roof right outside. So thank you for bringing this to my attention. We're going to fix the roof first. And then 2 years from now, we're going to paint it. And they're all like, but I had to fix the water, and I had to make sure the water still wasn't getting in. Otherwise, I was just wasting the money on the interior finishes. So you have to think that through. If I had just painted this, the stain would have been back very quickly. Likewise, one of my staff was looking at plaster damage in the Rocky Hill Meeting House. This is kind of a 2-story space that you're looking at, and they identified all the areas of repair, or at least of damage. You know, this was their condition assessment. A lot of them made a lot of sense. They knew exactly what was going on. But when they looked at 6 and 7 here, they were kind of like, I don't understand why the damage is happening in this location. Sorry, I don't have images of it, but they're like, what's going on here? And ultimately, we felt like there was like a downward pull in this one post. So the post in between 6 and 7, there was a downward pull. So we decided to open up the outside of the building and look at the sill. So the kind of structural member at the base of your building, found it totally deteriorated. So that post had kind of dropped 3 inches into the sill, and it pulled the building down with it. And that's why we were seeing cracking. Now, luckily, only in these spots, we were able to kind of patch things up. Didn't move that post that much at that point, because that's a lot to kind of reset. But if we had just fixed that, we would have missed that kind of underlying cause of the issue. So you should always think, can I do something about the underlying cause? And you might not always be able to do that. You know, so this like a list, you know, so the loss of paint, you know, well, paint fails at a certain point. So maybe I can't do anything about it, but maybe the gutter failure led to paint and wood deterioration. So instead of just painting, maybe we should fix the gutter. And then I'm big on gutters and climate change. So I'll tell you, your gutters might not be properly sized for the intense rains we're getting right now. So that's something you should think about. And then maybe the gutter, you know, maybe the gutter should be part of that project. And then, you know, there's splashback. The rain's coming down, it's hitting splashback. Why are we getting sill damage here? Is it that splashback? Is it this? Can we fix that so that if we repair the sill and the water table, we're not repeating that? And the same is like, you know, sometimes it's just like, oh, we haven't repointed in 50 years. That's a really long time. So maybe we just need to point more recently, you know, more frequently. And then finally, again, that context of the feature. What is the history? What is the history of the structure of the feature? What are the periods of significance for the feature in the building? What is the history of repair? All of that is critical. You would pull that from your historic structures reports. I'll be totally honest, we don't have historic structures reports for all of our buildings. But if we do a project, we basically write mini historic structures reports. My project managers have to do the research to figure out what was going on historically, what is important, how do we, you know, define the repair around the context of history. All right, here we are. The last 2 items, scope and treatment plan. And I'm going to call that, now we're at the actual project plan stage. And so what makes a project plan? It's that scope and treatment plan, and then it's a whole bunch of other things like drawings, photographs, condition assessments, stuff. All of this is what it's what you're getting to, so you can hand it off to a contractor and say, this is what I want you to do at my site. And so, you know, the project plan is really important. It needs to be thoughtful, it needs to be thorough, and you need to be able to convey the issues so that they can properly convey to you how they're going to repair it and what that cost is going to be. Lots of edits go into developing that. So you review, you edit, you review again, you think you're done, review it one more time because there's probably more edits. There's a lot of process and there's a lot of kind of correcting that goes on. And so let's talk about the scope. What is the scope? To me, it means it's a high level overview of steps. And I know you've been waiting for the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and I give credit to one of my former staff people who put me on the peanut butter and jelly sandwich wavelength. But here's the scope of work. If you wanted to create a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you're going to lay out 2 pieces of bread. You're going to put peanut butter on it. You're going to put jelly, and you're going to put that bread together. Sounds good, right? So let's go back and define what is the objective. The objective is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We've got the same scope. But as I said, you always need to review, because in this case, the criticality here is that the peanut butter and jelly sandwich is for my son. So my son is 8 years old. He's probably like many kids these days, very picky about his food. And so I'm thinking about that, and that's important. Now, if you're writing a scope for your building, it's your building. Your building is my son. You know, it's your building has its own concerns and needs. My son has his own concerns and needs, and that's important because not every peanut butter and jelly sandwich is the same. So just to kind of give you context, though, like if I say, okay, so I want to replace the roof in kind, you know, the scope of work might be, oh, we're going to remove the shingles and install shingles. So I wanted to kind of now base you back in a preservation project that might be familiar, because peanut butter and jelly sandwich is probably not familiar to most people. And the scope is really that. I'm done with the scope. I've said this is what my project is. So now I'm going to move on to the treatment plan. So scope of work, really easy to write, ideal for kind of preliminary review, but there's not much detail and there's lots of room for error and misunderstanding. So the treatment plan and specifications, I use treatment plan because it's kind of friendlier than specifications. You mentioned specifications, a lot of people get scared. Oh, I don't know about that. Or frankly, some contractors get scared. They're like, I don't do specifications, you know, and it's like, okay, how about a treatment plan? Oh, okay, that sounds better. So it's more detailed. That means it's harder to develop, right? But it's also going to be more restrictive because you're going to have more detail in it. So it's critical for conveying technical information, and ultimately it's critical for ensuring compliance, whether it's the Secretary of Interior's standards, it's the granting agency, it's a reviewing agency. You're probably not going to meet compliance if you just say, I'm going to replace the roof, because they're going to say, with what? And how are you going to do it? And what kind of materials are you using? And how big is the exposure? And you'll be like, huh, that wasn't really in my project plan. So how do you make it? You expand the scope beyond what seems reasonable. Like you take that scope of work and you take each of those bullet points and you just go for it. And you say, what are all the possible things I could do under this bullet point? And so to take us back to the peanut butter and jelly sandwich for my son, let's presume the contractor is my mother. She is taking care of my son. And I have said, hey, mom, he's going to want lunch. Can you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for him? And she'll be like, of course. Couldn't be simpler, right? Well, no, again, it's my son. He's got very specific needs. So let's take that first one. Lay out 2 pieces of bread. How could this be complicated? Well, first of all, we're going to use white bread, but maybe an improved alternative. But you got to take it from the center of the loaf, because the heel, no, he's not going to like it. And now when you put the bread on the plate, just make sure the bottom of the bread is pointed toward the sandwich maker, right? So you have 2 pieces, they're both pointing back towards you. So what is this? This is materials and methodology. The materials, white bread, proved alternative. Don't use the heel. Methodology, make sure they're placed in a certain orientation. This is what a treatment plan or specification is all about, just defining these elements. Now we're going to apply the peanut butter. Sounds simple, right? Organic, chunky peanut butter only, please. Now you're going to need to that. We've all done that. We've all got that organic peanut butter, right? You open it up, it's covered with oil. If I don't specify to stir that, it's going to be a nasty, nasty sandwich. So stir that peanut butter, ensure the oils and solids are appropriately mixed and homogeneous. Peanut butter consistency should be thick but spreadable, which is kind of ironic. There's a lot of materials in the world that they say stir until it's the consistency of peanut butter. So there's a little inside joke there. But you're going to use the knife and you're going to gently apply about 2 tablespoons worth to both pieces of bread. So that's 4 tablespoons total. I could probably be clearer about that. And why are we doing that? Because it's going to be a moisture barrier from the jelly. So I want it on both sides. I want it on both pieces of bread because I don't want the jelly leaking through. And now we all have spread peanut butter, especially not well mixed organic chunky peanut butter, and you've ripped the bread. Okay, well, if it's ripped, you gotta get a new piece of equal size and type, and that's acceptable. Don't throw in wheat bread all of a sudden if it's paired up with white bread. It's just a bad scene. Now we're going to apply the jelly. You're going to use grape jelly or an approved alternate, quarter-sized dollop to the center of one side of the bread and use the knife, spread it. Now you're going to match them so that the bottoms are oriented and the peanut butter and jelly are on the inside of the sandwich. I mean, who's going to make it with the outside? But you never know. You got to be clear. So when you're developing your project plan, sometimes you're like, well, I think this is what I want to do, but sometimes I'm not totally sure. Or maybe, once we start the work, we'll realize we have a little bit more money, or we're going to do something else. Or, frankly, there's two ways to do something and we wanted to get a price. So you do something called adults, which stands for additions and alterations. You build it into the kind of project plan that you ask the contractor to bid on. And ultimately it's saying, okay, adult number one, it's possible that my son might want sliced bananas. So if that is approved and he says, yes, please put them on in the way I've listed here. Now, adult number two, when you finish the sandwich, crust should be cut off. I don't know if he wants this yet. It's kind of a day-by-day decision. So we're going to leave it as an adult. My mom knows that it's coming up. So the contractor knows it's going to happen. It could happen. They've given me a price on it. And now we decided to implement that adult. Now, if we didn't do that, you're in the middle of the project, right? So my son is like, I want this. Or the contractor said, this is what's going to happen if you do that. Or you say, I actually have changed my mind. I want to do something else. And when you're in the middle of the project, that's dangerous because now we're talking change orders. That's something you didn't plan for. And all of a sudden that money isn't in the project budget. You're now dealing with a new entity. And in this case, I forgot to tell my mom about the diagonal cut. And that bread needs to be cut that way. So I left it out of the contract. My mom serves the sandwich. My son says, I need it diagonally cut. Okay, well, that wasn't part of the project plan. So now that's going to cost us money. So again, these are the elements. That's why you want to be thoughtful and thorough. So if we take it to a roof, and don't worry, I'm not going to go through every step of a roof, but again, we need to review this. And why do we need to review it? Because actually, if you're going to do a roof, it's not just removing the shingles and installing shingles. You while you're up there, you might want to repoint the chimney. And when you remove the shingles, I know there's been ongoing water damage. Maybe I can see it from the inside. We're probably going to need to inspect the sheathing. So the stuff that the shingles are sitting on, we're going to repair that as necessary. Then we're going to install shingles. And frankly, while we're up there, let's repair the gutters. So now my scope has gotten much longer. And likewise, your treatment plan is going to be longer as well. And again, I'm not going to go through this. You guys know how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, so I'm sure you'll be fine with a roof. But the point is, it doesn't stop there. I could give that scope to a contractor and he could give me a project, just like I could go to a restaurant and ask for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But what you get as the final product, if you're not specific, is wildly up for grabs. And so I could go to that restaurant and get focaccia bread with, rosemary infused peanut butter, and my son is not going to be happy. And that's because I didn't specify what it needed to be. Likewise, you could give that scope to a contractor and say, I want you to replace the roof and repoint the chimney. And if you don't define what repointing the chimney means and what replacement of the roof means, who knows what you're going to get. So treatment plan and specifications, more detailed than a scope. I've just covered that. Highly technical content, offers strong guidance as to the proper implementation of a project. So specifications, again, just so we can get scared together. It is usually following an industry standard format. I'm going to tell you it's repetitive, very, very repetitive. And it's not linear, but by trade, it's kind of, so when I say that, I kind of mean you're going to do your chimney pointing, and that's covered under Division 04 masonry. You're going to do your roof, which is under thermal and moisture protection, but you're going to do flashing around the chimney, and that's under Division 05 metals. It's a lot of different documents, because in a massive project, that's actually how it's going to work. There's going to be a specific person who does flashing and a specific person who does, chimney work and all of that. Often with the work we do, we're dealing with a preservation professional who does a lot of it themselves, or they know how, they're dealing with the project as a whole. They're like, I'm going to bring in so-and-so to do the chimney work. I've given them this, we're dealing with kind of a different project. So it's a little more flexible for us. But frankly, to be honest, because there's such a rigor to the specifications, it's also easier to forget information if you're kind of doing it on the fly for each project. And frankly, with that, we have walked through the process. We have developed our project plan. We are ready to go to a contractor. And I think I'm going to stop sharing, and I am here to answer questions you might have.
Well, Ben, thank you so much. I never get enough of that presentation, because it really is, it does resonate. I mean, once you start thinking about it, all those things that seem natural and all those assumptions you make, you can't assume that someone else has the same assumptions. And I mean, I think a lot of it just comes down to communication, right? You need to communicate your needs and expectations in a clear way, in a specific way, because you really can't, you can't rely on everyone having a sort of parallel understanding of facts or the needs. And everybody will be happier and the project will be better if the communication is clear and thorough right from the outset. So thanks for, that analogy is great. And, but I think people learn a lot from it as well. It becomes clear what's needed to really develop, a thorough project plan and process. So we do have some questions, in addition to the general comments that they love the analogy, and anybody who has a kid understands how complicated peanut butter and jelly sandwiches can become. But a question from Derek says, have any of the projects through Historic New England used drone technology to capture data for assessments and documentation?
Yes. Back in the early days of drones, actually, I was fortunate enough to have a board member gift me a drone, and I was using that for our own internal assessments. And we had, in fact, built a project plan for the Mass Preservation Projects Fund, MPPF, sorry, that's sponsored by the Massachusetts Historical Commission. We built a roofing project based on that, because we were able to have aerial shots of the roof. Now, I will say, in these days, I am working on behalf of an organization, so I have to have a pilot's license to fly the drone. So I can't actually do that anymore with our organizationally owned drone. However, we just did a project, an assessment project, where we hired an outside engineering firm for the Otis House in Boston, and they did an extensive drone survey of the property. So they use that to kind of help them see all the details that they needed to see for writing up our report. And I now have access to the photos. We've actually internally added those photos, because if you do a proper survey, we had 1,200 images, but we're able to make a 3D mesh model based on those images, and we were kind of playing around with that in-house. So we have both. I have 1,200 images, detailed images of the exterior of the building, but I also now have a 3D model of the building, exterior of the building as well.
Great. A question from Diane about paint. And this is one of my current bugaboos, is paint ain't what it used to be. But Diane's question is, how soon after the last complete paint job should a new prep and paint job be considered? And kind of part of this, as she says, is a sort of aesthetic. You want the building to continue to look kind of fresh and clean and in good condition, but also you want to make sure it's being protected. And as I've indicated, I think that we've all experienced the need to paint more often, even when you think you did a really good job of prep work, or if it's on new material, paint isn't lasting the way that it used to be. So what are your experiences related to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is exactly what it is the paint, it just isn't lasting the way it used to be. And as is our habit with historic buildings, we like to paint on top of existing paint layers. And so we're really kind of building up layers. And we do that for very specific reasons, and in part because we don't want to lose the history of the older paint layers. And so we often kind of leave it up there because we know that's the fail-safe kind of record of history of finishes at a house. It gets complicated because nowadays, I've talked to a couple painters about this, there's just so many layers of paint that we can do a really good job to scrape and prep the areas of failure, paint the rest of the building, that within 2 years, an area that seemed fine could fail. And so they're like at a point where they can't really guarantee a time frame. Now we're seeing, if we do a paint job, we're seeing 5 to 7 years before you really see visible failure points. So I think I noticed in the comment or the question that 5 was used. That is true. And I think that's very problematic. That is the, if you have 160 buildings or even just one, 5 years is not enough time. Like, you don't want to be thinking about that again. And so I think that is a major issue in the field. We are very starting to think about, and frankly think about, more traditional materials that breathe better, last longer, and that's kind of going back to linseed oil-based paints. So oil-based paints, replacing the lead, which obviously is problematic with zinc. The lead made the paint last a really long time. The zinc seems to be performing well, but it's a much different painting process, and it takes a huge amount of time to dry. So we're just deploying it right now on small repairs and not really wholesale buildings. But I would love to have a test case of a full building.
A related question is, in your experience, are any of the advertised 10 to 20 year paints actually lasting that long?
Well, I don't think I know the 10 to 20 year paints. So at best, when we work with a couple high-end painters, and they make their recommendations of paints they think are lasting a long time. So we usually do that. Now it's usually kind of the same old, Ben Moore, or some Sherwin-Williams. Some people have their pride, their product that they pride themselves on. I think the best we could get, if they what I've been told is, if we strip our building all the way back down to wood and paint it from scratch, they would guarantee a 10-year paint job. And that's what they're guaranteeing for us. Now we're in that position where we're not quite ready to pull the trigger on a full scrape job, but that's what they're offering. Now, if we're talking about like Rhino Shield or something like that, I think those are more of a problematic. They are very much almost encapsulating enamel-based paint, and while the paint might last, I'm not sure it's very good for vapor transmission. So I would just be thoughtful about the materials and what they might be doing behind the scenes, because even today's latex is starting to become not very kind of permeable to moisture, and you want the building to be able to breathe, back and forth.
Right. And some of those coatings are very hard. They might fall off on their own in certain places, but they're maybe very hard to totally remove if you would want to do that. So I think sometimes if it seems too good to be true, it might be too good to be true. In terms of color, do you do your own internal color analysis, or can you recommend other local companies that do that work? I know of a couple, but
yeah, I mean, Historic New England, or the Society for Preservation of New England Antiquities, as we were known for 100 years, we did our own paint analysis for a long time. In fact, some of our staff in the 70s really spearheaded the process. But that being said, we don't do that anymore in-house. So we do contract out. I would be hesitant to just start throwing out names because I'm sure I would probably leave someone off, but feel free to kind of contact me if you are interested. I'll kind of share some of the groups we've worked with.
And also those in Preservation Massachusetts Preservation Directory, we have some companies that are listed as well, which are probably, there's a lot of overlap with, you might have worked with Ben, I imagine, on that list.
Yeah.
This is a bit of a loaded question. So can you share with us one of your more challenging projects at one of the house museums and any lessons learned?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it probably is very loaded. I think I'm just gonna suggest the bigger the project, the harder it is. And so I will point to our conversion of the Eustis estate. So we acquired a mansion in Milton, Massachusetts, and we took our time. We had to convert it to a public institution, so we had to meet all code, and it's first and second floor, fully accessible, and we had to work through all of that processes. The bigger the project, the more details you miss. And I'm going to suggest, like I talk about that process, if you're just doing one roof, it's easier to focus. If you're doing one roof, but also like 1,000 other major projects with 1,000 other details, it is hard to stay on top of it and get the points you want in there, because the architects are starting with a standard basis, set of specs. They're working with you. They're trying to massage them to meet your standards. But, our specification book for that project was something like 1,400 pages. And can you imagine reviewing line by line that technical detail to find all the details that you cared about? And so I would say, that was a big project, and it was, there were some details that kind of got smooshed along the way where you were like, oh, wait, we got it, and that's where change orders lead in, because then you step back and say, well, that's not going to be okay. Like I missed that, and we need to step back. So, right. But that happens on smaller projects too, where you think, again, like peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you think you got it, and you leave out something. I mean, every time I give that presentation, I'm like, oh, I could have written that better, or I could change this, or I could change that, because sometimes it's not clear. And so, every project, and that's why I say review. It's very difficult, but it's really necessary.
Well, it's not always a bad thing to break a big project down into smaller components if you really need to be able to focus carefully on certain elements, or you want to make sure you don't miss things. And I know we always say, well, make your project as big as you can because it's more efficient that way, but that builds in challenges too. So you just have to kind of balance, balance things and figure out, what's going to be the most doable and what's going to result in the most successful outcome. So. Well, I think we've answered all the questions that I see in the question and answer box, but Ben, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I love, again, this analogy, and I've seen this presentation a few times too, and it's a good one. So I hope you do it far and wide. And, thank you for your time. Thanks to Historic New England for sparing you for part of the day today. And thank you everybody else for attending the session, and good luck with your projects.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Bye.